It's 1803. Napoleon stands 5'7", but one single caricature twists his height into a lie that lasts 200 years. The cartoon shrinks him into a tiny tyrant. Basically, Napoleon got ratioed before social media even existed. Born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, this man conquered Italy, Egypt, and most of mainland Europe. He rewrote legal codes, crowned himself emperor. Yet 2 centuries later, the average person remembers him as a tiny, angry man with a hand tucked into his coat, compensating for something. The answer is not a measurement error. It is a deliberate propaganda campaign. Here is what actually happened. In 1803, Napoleon had crushed every coalition they threw at him, so London turned to a weapon deadlier than musket satire. The artist James Gillray published a cartoon called The King of Brobdingnag and Gulliver. It showed King George I towering over a tiny, childlike Napoleon. But it stuck. British newspapers and pamphlets repeated the joke. They translated Napoleon's height from French measurements, where the pouce was slightly longer than an English inch, and reported him as 5'2". Add the visual trick of his Imperial Guard, elite soldiers selected for being 6 feet or taller. The propaganda worked so well it outlived the war. It outlived Napoleon himself. By the 20th century, historians had debunked the myth, but the damage was permanent. It became a psychological term, the Napoleon complex, a diagnosis applied to any short man who acted assertive. A deliberate lie born from wartime mockery created a clinical-sounding label that people still use today to dismiss shorter men as inherently insecure. The people who believed the cartoon did. The autopsy table. Napoleon's body lies still, and the surgeon François Antomarchi picks up his pen. Simple. Correct. But here is where the math goes off a cliff. The French pouce was not the British inch. One French pouce measured 1.066 inches. That tiny decimal, barely a 1/16 of an inch. Multiply it out. 62 French pouces times 1.066 inches equals 66.1 inches. Napoleon was not short. He was average for a Frenchman of his era. But British translators did not do the math. They saw 5 pides 2 pouces and wrote 5 feet 2 inches. That is not a rounding mistake. That is the difference between a man who can look you in the eye. And here is the dirty secret. No standardized international measurement system existed in 1821. The metric system had been invented in France during the Revolution. So every nation measured things slightly differently. The British used inches. It was a chaotic mess of local units, and propagandists exploited it ruthlessly. British newspapers knew exactly what they were doing. They reported Napoleon's height as 5'2" because it fit the narrative. A short emperor was a laughable emperor. A short emperor could be mocked. The public never checked the math because the public did not want to check the math. And so the lie hardened into fact. Every history book reprinted the 5'2" figure. Every political cartoon doubled down. By the time anyone bothered to convert the units correctly, the real Napoleon, 5'7", average height, perfectly normal. But the measurement mess was only the beginning. And that visual came from a man with a sharp pen and zero mercy. Napoleon is 34 years old, fresh off crushing Austria at Marengo. They have no army that can match him on land, and their navy is good, but not invincible. So London does what any desperate empire does when faced with a superior military mind. James Gillray was not just any satirist. He was the most vicious visual propagandist of his era. In 1803, he published his masterpiece of humiliation, the king of Brobdingnag and Gulliver. King George I, depicted as a giant, holds a tiny Napoleon in his palm and peers at him through a telescope like a curious scientist examining a beetle. He is a literal toy. His hat is a thimble. His face is twisted into a petulant, angry scowl. The image was a lie from start to finish. Napoleon, he was not childlike. He had commanded armies across 3 continents. A giant king inspecting a tiny French emperor. The message was clear. Britain is mature. France is a tantrum-throwing toddler. You just need eyes. And the British public. The cartoon spread like wildfire through London's print shops, coffee houses, and taverns. In an era before television or the internet, a single image could reach thousands of people within days, reprinted as cheap engravings. People who had never seen a real Frenchman suddenly knew exactly what the emperor looked like. Napoleon was 34 years old at the time of the cartoon. He had conquered Italy at 27, Egypt at 29. He was in his physical prime, but Gillray drew him as a balding, stunted, middle-aged gremlin with a permanent frown. The image did not just attack his height, it attacked his dignity. A short man could not be a great man. That was the message, repeated across hundreds of copies, nailed to pub walls and passed from hand to hand. Battles would be fought. Hundreds of thousands of men would die, but the most durable weapon Britain produced during that entire conflict, it was a piece of paper with a drawing of a tiny man being held like a doll. It outlived Napoleon. It outlived Gillray himself, who died in 1815. The visual stuck, because visuals always stick. We remember what we see far longer than what we read. The actual measurements, 5 feet 7 inches, average height. The lie had won. Here is the trap. His own elite troops made him look short. The Imperial Guard had a minimum height requirement of 5 feet 9 inches. These were not just soldiers, they were human towers selected for their imposing physical presence. Napoleon stood beside them every time he reviewed his army, every time he rode into battle, every time a painter or engraver captured a scene for posterity, and every single time the visual contrast was devastating. 5 feet 7 inches is average. But when you place an average man next to a formation of giants, the camera, or in this case, witnesses who saw Napoleon surrounded by his guard did not report. The emperor was of ordinary stature. They reported the emperor was noticeably shorter than his men. Napoleon did not create the Imperial Guard to make himself look taller. He created it because every European monarch had elite guard units composed of the tallest, strongest men available. The Prussian Guard, the Russian Imperial Guard, the British Foot Guards, all of them cherry-picked the tallest recruits from their populations. But tradition did not care about optics. By surrounding himself with giants, the math is brutal. The average French soldier of his era was around 5 feet 4 inches. He was not short. He was slightly above average for a Frenchman, born in 1769. When you stand next to men who are 5 feet 10 or 6 feet tall, and in a world where first impressions were carved into copper plates and printed by the thousands, British cartoonists did not need to invent a short Napoleon. Take a 5'7" man, place him next to a 6-foot guardsman, draw the guardsman even taller, shrink Napoleon even further. He just sharpened it until it drew blood, and that is how a 5'7" emperor became the world's most famous short person. Not because he was short, because he stood next to giants. The lie did not die with Napoleon. By the 1830s, every British schoolchild knew the French emperor had been a tiny, angry man. British publishers reprinted the error so many times it became official record. French historians fought back. The propaganda had become self-sustaining. It just needed people to repeat what they had heard. American newspapers, eager for content and allergic to fact-checking, reprinted the British version. Mark Twain made jokes about it. Politicians used it to insult rivals. The 5'2" figure appeared in textbooks from Boston to San Francisco, and nobody questioned it because questioning it would have required converting French units of measurement. Silent films depicted Napoleon as a short, stomping caricature. Hollywood cast actors who were actually short, reinforcing the visual lie with living proof. Psychologists wrote papers about how short men overcompensate, citing Napoleon as their prime example. They just assumed the cartoon was accurate. The term Napoleon complex has been used for decades to dismiss ambitious short men as insecure. He was average height, possibly taller than average, and his ambition had nothing to do with compensation. It is the academic equivalent of diagnosing someone based on a meme. The BBC, the Smithsonian, and major historical journals now routinely publish the corrected figure. The Imperial Guard made him look smaller. All of it is documented, verified, and freely available. They will still say 5'2". The lie has outlived the truth by 2 centuries. The Napoleon complex remains a recognized term in 2026. You can find it in psychology textbooks, self-help articles. It is used to dismiss short men as angry, aggressive, and insecure. It is used to explain everything from workplace disputes to international conflicts. And it is all based on a cartoon drawn by a man who died in 1815. He conquered Europe, rewrote the legal code of an entire continent, and died in exile. He had a complex about Britain, Russia, and the weather, all of which were far more justified targets of his rage. The world believed the lie because the lie was funnier than the truth. So the next time someone mentions the Napoleon complex, remember this: the man who supposedly invented short man syndrome, he was taller than his own Marshals. He was taller than most men in the room. The only thing short about Napoleon was the patience of his enemies, and even that took them 15 years to exhaust. The legacy was 2 centuries, and the moral of the story is simple.